Well, this afternoon, the speakers are going to be talking about the speech which President Trump gave in August at Fort Myer, which outlined a new American policy in Afghanistan. We are seeing possibly a Trump doctrine, not the Monroe Doctrine, a Trump doctrine. And he was talking about the Indo-Pacific region, which encompasses all of South Asia. But at the heart lies some of the intractable problems of Afghanistan, I'm sure.
We are holding a seminar today to ask the question, will the new US-Afghan policy prevent cross-border terrorism? We have some distinguished speakers, Professor Johnson from California. We have a former ambassador, Mr. Samad, currently in the United Nations, and we have a BBC correspondent, Mr. Azami from the BBC World Service. The chairman will be Mr. Owen Bennett-Jones. He is also from the BBC. The subject we think is lively because very topical, and it's concerning basically whether or not the American new policy will be effective. And there will be an emphasis, a focus on Pakistan, because its future behavior is crucial in determining whether or not there will be peace and a settlement in Afghanistan.
Well, today I'm going to talk about the, quote, Trump new plan for Afghanistan. And I'm going to be talking that it's not going to make much of a difference for a wide variety of reasons. I think the speech left out more than it actually included. So I'm going to actually give a critical talk concerning what Trump's plan for Afghanistan is.
In your opinion, what is the real solution, do you think, lies for the peace in that area?
Well, I mean, it doesn't lie in body bags. It has to be a political solution. It has to be a creative political solution because of the multi-layered contextual nature of Afghanistan, which is a very complex country. So, but Afghans are pragmatic people, and I think that we can eventually work out a political solution between Kabul and the Taliban. And if history has shown us anything, even with radicals like the Taliban, you know, once they have to administer, it moves them towards moderation. So my hope is in 5 to 10 years, we can come to some type of solution between Kabul and the Taliban. And it might even initially require breaking up the country. But with strong indications that the country will be brought back together once certain criteria are met. But my big fear is the interlopers. My big fear is Pakistan, possibly Iran, Russia, China. Afghanistan has the potential of becoming a proxy war once the international forces leave, and that's my real concern. But the sustainability of the Afghan security force is something that we all have to worry about. So ultimately, I mean, the solution to this problem, this 17-year war, is definitely political.
I'm going to try to give an Afghan perspective on what the new American strategy toward Afghanistan and South Asia means, what are the merits, what may be some of the pitfalls, what to watch out for, how to best implement that policy so that we can, on one hand, break the military stalemate that exists right now in Afghanistan, on the other hand, deal with terrorism with all its different dimensions in that region of the world, make sure that the Afghan people benefit from less violence, more peace, and more rebuilding and reconstruction in Afghanistan. So I will try to give a comprehensive view from an Afghan angle.
Mr. Samad, in your personal view, what really do you think could be the solution to this burning question and problem for years?
This war has been going on for 16 years plus now. It's called America's longest war. It involves NATO and many other nations who have contributed either on the military side or on the civilian side, helping Afghanistan rebuild itself. It has taken a big toll on everyone, but mostly on the Afghan people themselves. I think that what it will take will be a disengagement at the regional level of those entities and players and actors who are playing a negative role in either supporting terrorism, offering them sanctuaries, or being spoilers for reasons that may or may not have anything to do with Afghanistan directly. I think that one of the lessons that we have learned over the last 16 years or so, and even before that, is that you cannot pursue foreign and security policy interests by supporting a non-state, violent, extremist, terrorist actors. And I think that that is something that needs to stop in order for that region to find stability and peace and prosperity.
Okay, I think we're going to start in a couple of minutes. We're just getting some late arrivals, but I presume we're about ready to go. If I get the thumbs up from the organisers, we're good to go, yes. Okay, so welcome. My name's Owen Bennett-Jones. I'll be moderating this session today on will the new US-Afghan policy stop cross-border terror in the region. And just as an opening remark, say that it is quite striking on the border now on the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. There are now a surprisingly robust number of forts every 500 meters or so along the entire FATA-Afghanistan border. It's a new situation that's developed there in the last 3 or 4 years, and that building is complete. So that border is actually now much more controllable than it was, although as I understand it, there are no similar facilities on the Baluch-Afghan border yet. So I see. Let me just begin with Lord Bruce, who I should have introduced first, and we will get you to kick us off. Thank you very much, sir.
I just wanted to welcome everyone to the symposium this afternoon and to thank the University of London for allowing us to use this fantastic room for our forum. And I'd like to thank everyone at the Democracy Forum who've worked so hard to pull this event together and to bring this stellar panel of speakers to address us this afternoon. Not an easy task to bring them all together in one room. And I'd like to thank Owen Bennett-Jones for agreeing to chair this afternoon. Our seminar question, will the new US-Afghan policy stop cross-border terrorism in the region, is a response to a remix of American foreign policy in Afghanistan. It follows a speech made by President Trump in August at Fort Myer, which has been the cause of much speculation about the direction of US regional policy in South Asia. His speech raises the question of whether we are seeing the emergence of a Trump doctrine, or are we witnessing the inevitability of a significant power vacuum? It's easy to forget how long the US has committed militarily to Afghanistan, but it is engaged in a war which is entering its 16th year. This is a conflict nearly 4 times as long as the First World War. It's a war with no end in sight and whose value and relevance is increasingly questioned by the American people. And squaring up to the predicament that his administration inherited, President Trump acknowledged that he had been dealt a bad and very complex hand. But he warned against the extremely predictable consequences of a hasty withdrawal. Instead, he told his mainly military audience, we must address the reality of the world as it exists right now, the threats we face and the confronting of all of the problems of today. Although Trump was keen to elaborate on specific realities and threats in his speech, such as the inadequacy of civil society in Afghanistan, or the continuing insurgency in parts of the country, or the evident duplicity of Pakistan, he was also emphatic that the US will no longer use military might to construct democracies in faraway lands, or try to rebuild other countries in our own image. Understandably, several commentators have seized on these comments as indicative of a new era for Pax Americana. John Allen of the Brookings Institute was quick to respond to the speech. The United States enjoys only limited influence in this crucial part of the world, he cautioned. US policy is about improving the odds of success, or at least reducing the odds of failure at this point, not about ensuring any given outcome. So what would be a realistic outcome? Perhaps all that can be reasonably expected is that the United States ensures that the Afghan government is able to reverse the momentum of the war. But is this primarily a military objective, or inevitably will it involve a much wider perspective of regional power politics? Maybe this is where United States involvement in South Asia finds a new point of deflection. There is no doubt that President Trump went out of his way to offer a thinly veiled threat to Islamabad, warning that Pakistan has much to gain from partnering with our effort in Afghanistan, but it has much to lose. But it has much to lose by continuing to harbour terrorists. Time will tell if his words will have the effect of propelling Pakistan further towards China's hegemony. But in a speech distinguished by the absence of any mention of China, the President instead referred to India as a key security and economic partner of the United States. He praised India's contribution to regional stability, and for the first time since he took office, he spoke of American objectives for Afghanistan within the context of the broader Indo-Pacific region. And he has since frequently deployed this phrase, most recently on his five-nation tour in early November, perhaps more as a trope to redefine the impetus of American hegemony and to draw a line around China's strategic ambitions. But even if the Trump administration sets itself the limited objectives of reversing the momentum of the insurgency and preventing a power vacuum and assisting Afghanistan to establish a functional state, it could find it very difficult to avoid participating in the competing political hemispheres of China and India. China faces its own insurgency challenges on its western flank, while its economic security will increasingly depend on maintaining a potentially vulnerable access corridor to the Indian Ocean via Pakistan, as Britain once depended on the Suez Canal to connect its far-flung possessions. Indeed, there's much that all the affected countries could learn from British history. Just as Britain's diplomats constructed elaborate strategic alliances in the 18th and 19th centuries to prevent Europe from being dominated by a single state, so the United States may have to play a similar role in South Asia. It will need to work hard to prevent the instability of Afghanistan from spilling over and stoking up tensions between India, Pakistan and China. We should not forget that the First World War was triggered by a terrorist outrage. Let us hope that a Sarajevo moment does not happen in Afghanistan on America's watch.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Bruce. Sorry to jump the gun there. And yes, just to say welcome to you all. And we're going to be discussing this issue of the new US-Afghan policy up until 5 o'clock. And just to reiterate that opening point, that it is an interesting new situation, that the border between Fatah and Afghanistan is now fortified and controllable, and that the Baluch-Afghan border is, as I understand it, that has not happened on the Baluch-Afghan border. But nonetheless, it is an interesting situation. So we've got one speaker down, I'm afraid. Dr. Emily Winterbottom from RUSI, Royal United Services Institute, has got quite a severe flu and is unable to join us. So we'll have three speakers, but we'll have Q&A as we go along, and have a discussion, I hope, as well as just comments. So I should say phones off if we can, that would help. And I'm going to introduce the speakers as we go, rather than have a sort of tranche of introductions at the beginning. So let me start with Ambassador Omar Samad, who is the CEO of Silk Road Consulting in Virginia, former senior advisor to the chief executive of Afghanistan, spokesperson at the Afghan Foreign Ministry for a bit, and an ambassador in important countries, France amongst others. Now he's going to be helping us understand the Afghan perspective on all of this today. So, Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here in London, in this great university. I have very fond memories of London because I grew up here as a teenager when my father was a diplomat in the mid to late 1970s, before Afghanistan's start of crises in the late 70s, early 80s, and I went to the French Lycée here, so very fond memories of this country and the city. Thank you so much for the invitation. My thanks to the Democracy Forum and everyone who has been a part of this event and putting this together. As you said, I am here to offer an Afghan perspective. I will try my best. I don't know if there is such a thing as a unique Afghan perspective, but I will try to do so. And just as part of a disclaimer, I'm not speaking on behalf of, as an official or behalf of the Afghan government, even though I do at times offer my consulting services to the government of Afghanistan, as was the case just a few days ago during Dr. Abdullah's visit to the United States. I look also forward to the Q&A session and exchange that we will have on issues that will be brought up here. So the question before us is a very simple question. Will the new U.S.-Afghan policy stop cross-border terror in that region of the world? It's not just Afghanistan, it focuses on the region. And obviously Afghanistan sort of is the heart of the issues that keep us all preoccupied and have kept us preoccupied for the last 16 years if you count the post-9/11 world. And I think most Afghans' simple answer to that question would be yes, but a qualitative yes, because there are a lot of ifs that go with it. So yes, it can and maybe should be stopped, but we do need to be involved and engaged on many fronts to make sure that it does happen, and it happens in a way that is satisfactory to all stakeholders. And I want to emphasize all stakeholders by making sure that I do not exempt any country from this. In order for us to be able to have a global view of what is happening, I will spend a couple of minutes looking at pre-9/11 history to remind ourselves of what happened and led to that significant moment. Also then look at post-9/11 history, which is sort of a galore of policies that we have experienced with Afghanistan, and then dwell on the current situation with the latest announcements made by Washington, the reactions in Afghanistan and other countries, and what the way forward looks like. I don't think that non-Taliban Afghans who make up the majority of the population from every survey that has been conducted, they do not expect a complete and immediate stop to what some people call insurgency, others call terrorism, and even some call civil war, in my opinion, wrongly. But they do expect a gradual change in strategies and policies that feed and enable terrorism and militancy used as part of what Afghans consider as proxy confrontations and security policy perceptions that exist in our region, whether it's by state, non-state, or sort of the gray shades that exist between state and non-state actors. Now, post-Soviet withdrawal and communist collapse, the communist collapse period between 1989 and 1992 was accompanied by a withdrawal of the Western world from Afghanistan since the Soviet Union collapsed, and also accompanied by a certain level of apathy towards the political situation, which resulted in a vacuum in Afghanistan, part of which was filled by transnational terror outfits like Al-Qaeda throughout the 1990s, which also resulted in factional fighting in Afghanistan, especially in the capital, Kabul, bolstered mostly by regional proxy rivalries and meddling. The emergence in adoption and growth in the 1990s of what we call Talibanism as a proxy force that aimed to subjugate the Afghan people and Afghan society and introduce a new madrasa-infused and madrasa-fueled set of rules and norms which were anathema to Afghan traditions, social order, and history. In short, Afghanistan became, in the 1990s, a failed state, taken over by a conglomerate of terror and extremist groups under the Taliban umbrella, facilitated by Pakistan's military establishment and recognized by 3 countries at the time: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The later 2 countries, at some point before 9/11, cut off their relations with the Taliban. Pakistan was the only one left. Despite Afghan resistance and efforts to forestall Taliban advances inside the country under very rough conditions, and clear warnings by anti-Taliban forces that an attack on the West was imminent because of what we were hearing and seeing, not many practitioners, policy, and experts and academics in the West especially were paying attention or even grasping the essence of the threat brewing in that region before 9/11. I personally remember, having been in Washington those days and running an information center, there were very few people who listened to what was happening in Afghanistan and how the situation could boomerang or hurt others in the West or other parts of the world. 9/11 and other smaller scale attacks that took place in Europe before or after in other parts of the world were the tragic and hard to fathom wake-up calls. Since then, we have tried to put Afghanistan back on track. And for the past 10 years, unfortunately to no avail, we have aimed for a political solution to the conflict and through peace talks, but no results so far. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong. I want you to understand that the goal should not be a military and cannot be solely a military solution. We need to aim for a political peace deal and an end to hostilities. But for some odd reason, we just haven't found the right formula to go about it. In the post-9/11 era, we have half-heartedly and incoherently tried to fix the regional fault lines that are acting as enablers of militant sanctuaries and safe havens. We have prematurely shifted attention and resources to other hotspots. Iraq comes to mind. We have underfunded initially and then overfunded the Afghan mission, resulting in mismanagement, waste, corruption, and bad governance. We have announced incoherent withdrawal dates, enforced short-lived surges, and promoted toothless peace initiatives. Again, all to no avail, and with no tangible results between 2001 and now. That is a very long time to spend blood and treasure on any critical hotspot. The question has to be get, what is not working and what is preventing us from making headway? And most importantly, what to try next, given our record and the hard lessons and the best practices that we have experienced. As you've all heard it ad nauseum, Afghans have a clear answer to that question. We need to take care of the cross-border meddling in terror sanctuaries. And I have to say, today we are talking about sanctuaries in more than one country. We have always pointed to Pakistan, but as of lately, given the situation on the ground, I think that we can say that there are more than one country-specific sanctuaries evolving and developing in our region. Instead, the seesaw and overly cautious approaches adopted over the past decade have hurt Afghanistan, have victimized its people, and have put billions of dollars worth of investment in reconstruction and state building in jeopardy. Ironically, it has hurt every nation, including the UK's, that has had or continues to have deployments in Afghanistan and has funded the rebuilding efforts. So we have a common challenge, and we need collective measures to fix the situation by adopting new thinking and new tools. Which brings us to the new policy that was announced in Washington a few months ago. Some say that this policy is the same old recipe in new wrapping. Other cynics say it's a militarized option that will fail. Others point to the boogeyman and warn of dire consequences in a nuclear environment, etc., etc. We have different narratives on this. I, like many Afghans, have my own questions and doubts about this, but we think, generally speaking, that it is more focused, that this new policy is more focused, better defined in terms of goals and benchmarks, and with more promising prospects compared to business as usual, or worse, folding and capitulating. One of the big ifs of this policy has to do with implementation and follow-through. If it comes short or is entangled with other complexities, then we might not reach our goals. A few other points about the F's of this policy and what to do beyond just a military option. One, this new policy needs to remain conditions-based and stay away from publicly announced end dates or operational details. Two, it needs to look at the regional as well as internal Afghan dynamics that need to be addressed, such issues as safe havens that offer everything from indoctrination to training and financing. They all need conclusive solutions. Also, we need to keep the Afghan government on track with reforms, measures for good governance, rule of law, counter-narcotics, counter-corruption, and a viable political election process to strengthen the legitimacy of the state and rebuild popular trust through inclusivity. We also need to assure that the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, the Army and the new Air Force, are adequately trained and equipped to carry the burden by themselves as soon as possible. We also need, very importantly, a diplomatic surge by the West, by the United States and its allies, a diplomatic surge and maybe even an intelligence sharing initiative to keep the UN-mandated 2001 international coalition, which was built after 9/11, and includes the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese, and others who supported the post-Taliban Afghan setup, keep them on board in appraise of intentions and strategic outcome. Failing to keep that coalition of nations together, focused, and coordinated will have dire consequences for Afghanistan and the region. So the goal, as we understand it, is, unlike past attempts, to apply necessary pressure to break the military stalemate, disrupt the existing structures, including the nexus that exists with the drug business, and that feeds the networks, the terrorist networks, and offer other solutions along the way until we enter the political realm for a process that would be all-inclusive, dealing with a series of outstanding issues and interests that keep the countries of the region preoccupied. Terror and violence might not end for a long time to come because of the intractable historic tensions that exist in the region, but we need to try alternate ways and methods for creating space for peace in Afghanistan. And peace in Afghanistan will in itself create space for peace in the region. And on that note, let me end with a concept that ought to matter to all nations involved in South Central Asia, and that is the concept of developing a common vision amongst the countries of this part of the world for peace and prosperity. Today's Afghanistan, 70% of whose population is under 30 and internet savvy, wants peace. But the kind of peace that is realistic, that is just, all-inclusive, and durable. They also want an end to policies that have, for the past 25 years, nurtured, enabled, and supported extremist-induced violence across our borders in South and Central Asia. So the vision is of a region that is home to forward-looking nations, connected and economically integrated, aiming to build societies and political orders that reflect their popular aspirations and are void of political violence, terror, and extremism. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I think the way we'll proceed here is to have just a few questions to each speaker after they've made their comments, and then we'll have a more general discussion at the end. And perhaps I'll just kick this off, and I'll come to the audience in a minute and just ask one question, which is, you talk about no end dates and trust in government and regional politics and so on, but surely are the numbers, the American troop increase was so slight. Is there any reason to believe that it will make a difference to the military situation on the ground? Surely not.
Surely will. Surely. The view in Afghanistan, again, at all levels, including official view and those who are part of the US-NATO contingent, is that the Afghan forces have carried the burden since the end of 2014. And Taliban the goal and strategy of the Taliban was to wait for the withdrawal of the combat troops and make an attempt at capturing several key provinces in 2015, which they failed to do so. Only Kunduz fell for a few days and was recaptured. Yes, there are large swaths of Afghanistan that are considered either under Taliban control or are swaying between Taliban and government control. But they may be large territories in certain parts of the country, maybe some people say between 40–45%, which may be accurate, maybe daytime or nighttime, but the majority, there are other statistics that show that the majority of the population lives under government control. This doesn't mean that we are either winning or losing. There is a stalemate in Afghanistan, and that stalemate has to be broken. The Afghan forces have shown resilience. They have also paid a heavy price over the last 3 years. The general consensus is that these forces can withstand further assault, and knowing that the Taliban have also suffered heavily over the last 3 years and maybe nearing a breaking point. Breaking means that the tide might turn against them over the next 6 months to a year. This is not a short-term operational issue that we are talking about. We are talking about a strategy that will take from 1 to 2 years to materialize at the most. But it will involve American and NATO, mainly trainers and people who will, on the ground, help Afghans be more effective. It will also have a different plank as far as 2 other elements are concerned. One is special operations, the forces that will be doubled as far as making sure that they can take the fighting to the enemy and make a difference, as well as an increase in air power by the Afghans. These two combined with the help that US and NATO officers will bring on the ground at the battalion level to the Afghans, we think is going to make a difference. But as I said, this is not the one and only option that should be pursued. You have to have a diplomatic track. You have to have a domestic Afghan reform track, if you want to call it. And you have to make sure that all of this works in tandem.
Thank you very much. Now, I saw a hand go up, yes, on the front row there. And if you could say who you are, that will help us. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You mentioned...
So let's give you a microphone. I think that would be better. There we go.
This war has been going on for 16 years, and there is no peace formula in sight. Do you have a peace formula that you can suggest?
We are not, I don't think that the Afghan government is there yet. We're not at the stage of agreeing or coming up with a formula for peace. There is the intent and there is the political will to take the political road when it's feasible. It's a question of when it's feasible and how to make sure that we reach that point when we put more of our weight on the political side. Right now, there's a full understanding across the board that the weight has to be put mostly on the security side, that this military stalemate that we face has to be broken, and that the tide of war has to shift. Once the tide of war shifts, then we might, and we will, and hopefully we will be able to reach a certain point where then the political track will become more important. Now, there are a lot of moving parts to this. There's the, again, domestic Afghan part. There is the regional part. There are all these changes that are taking place at the regional level and beyond the regional level. The sort of new tendencies that are being felt and seen by countries such as Russia and Iran in this new environment that is shaping up, and how to make sure that, as I said earlier in my remarks, we all remain on the same page when it comes to fighting terrorism and making sure that this region finds stability. So as far as a peace formula is concerned, we have certain, I think that the Afghan government, the Afghan people agree that there are certain red lines and there are certain issues that are more paramount than others. For example, the Afghan people believe that they have earned the right to have a democratic future. The Afghan people believe that they have earned the right to make sure that their girls and women have their basic rights respected and that they have access to health and education and so on and so forth. That they want to make sure that if anyone, whether they're called Talib or they belong to any other Afghan armed faction, is willing to lay down their arms, that their rights are protected as citizens of that country under the Constitution, and that they also, by laying down their arms, will renounce violence and any affiliation to international terrorism. So, I mean, these are some of the broad outlines of what might constitute a peace formula for the future. But we are not there yet. I think that the focus has to be on how to break this military stalemate first.
Thank you very much. Question there, yeah.
Priyajit Debsakar. My question to you, sir, is what do you see the role of Chabahar port in maybe future NATO supplies to Afghanistan? Like, is there an option on the table? Thank you.
I see the Chabahar port, which has been developed and built between a cooperation agreement that involves India, Iran, and Afghanistan, as an important development in terms of giving Afghanistan a secondary access to a warm water port. Being a landlocked country, obviously, we have for the past 60, 70 years relied solely on Pakistan's access to their ports. But though the access through Pakistan has been very problematic for the past few years because of political and security issues that have come up on and off. And so this Chabahar is a very good alternative for Afghanistan. Now, having said this, coming to your question, I don't foresee in the near distant future a NATO use of this port, and I think that the reason is very clear, has to do with relations between NATO and the US and Iran. So as long as relations between Iran and the West, especially the United States, is cold and not friendly, this will not be an access point. Now, having said this, there are other options that have been used in the past and might be used again, and those options have to do with routes going north and northwestern part of Afghanistan through the Caucasus and through Central Asia. Again, given the fact that relations between Russia and the United States and agreements and coordination that they have on Afghanistan has to be bolstered through diplomatic channels in the weeks and months to come.
Thank you. A bit of a disadvantage because this light means I can't see you, but I think there's a question at the back there.
Hi, I'm Merab Baloch, a Baloch political activist and assistant to His Highness Khan of Kala Sulaiman Dawood. My question to you, Mr. Ambassador, why don't you name the Iran interference in the Afghanistan? Iran, specifically Iran support for the Taliban as much as Pakistan. The Iran support as much group of Taliban as much as Pakistan does. And then another question, seems to be no consequences for the Pakistanis support for Taliban. Pakistan has been training, arming, financing, facilitating Taliban for so long, and the American soldier has been killed, or British, matter of fact, has been killed because of the Iranian and Pakistani support for Taliban. So it is not seems to be the Afghan deciding their future, as you said, for the democracy, that they want to see the democracy for themselves and decide their life, or Afghan want to decide for themselves. It seems to be Pakistan deciding the Afghan future. What's a policy the American and Afghan has to face the Pakistan? What consequences or punishment for the Pakistan for the interfering for so long in Afghanistan?
Okay, thanks. Could you mic right over there? And
you want me to answer it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. I did allude to the fact in my remarks and earlier in the question that there are shifts taking place at the regional level that concern Afghanistan, and some of them have to do with Russian shifts and Iranian shifts. There are troubling reports that say that both countries have and continue to have contacts with some Taliban groupings. For the Iranians, it is those Taliban groupings that are mostly on the western and southwestern parts of Afghanistan, and it is also the same groups that are involved heavily in the drug smuggling and drug business, as well as terrorist activities. And the Afghan people and the Afghan government, I think, are taking this very seriously, because Iran, since 2001, as I mentioned, has played a rather constructive role since 2001 with the Bonn Conference and beyond. Relations with Iran at other levels of trade and cultural exchanges and people-to-people and refugee issues are actually can be called normal. It's just this one factor that has emerged over the last few months that is problematic, and I think that again, through diplomacy, and I'm hoping through diplomacy and through dialogue and exchanges and sharing the information that is needed with the Iranians, that they will realize that Daesh may be an enemy of theirs, but they're an enemy of Afghanistan as well as an enemy of the international community as a whole. But at the same time, the Taliban have also been an enemy of the Afghan people, an enemy of Iran, an enemy of the international community. So to sort of create this apple and orange issue with terrorism and this, be somewhat choosy and picky on who's a good terrorist, who's a bad terrorist, who's a good extremist, who's a bad extremist, is eventually not going to help either Iran or Afghanistan or anyone in that region of the world. And that is the same message that we've been giving to the Pakistanis all this time, that